Ooh, I'm a bit in the mood, so I'm going to read another chapter. Bliss Afterlife, written 15 years ago. I just tried to think when I actually started it, but it's irrelevant, actually, it doesn't matter. It's quite a long time ago, and I'm actually enjoying rereading what I've written so long ago, 2006, I know that for sure. So, this is the story about a reincarnation, and it's about the death of Bliss and her relatives and everything to do with death. We're now at chapter 45, and we are returning to Bliss, who is in the afterlife. Chapter 45, Bliss. I think I shall be moving to a different dimension soon. My time of reflection has ended. I'm still looking after Alexei, well, not Alexei anymore, but a little developing baby girl. It fills me with great delight that it was decided that she will be born to Faye and Ben, my own grandson in my last life. Alexei, a baby girl, share the same soul group as Ben, and in fact it is time that they share a life together. Again. Baby girl's soul still comes back here frequently. The growth period of a baby body happens on its own accord, and being physical is very exhausting. She needs resting here to recover her strength. She will need to grow 4 more months in Earth terms, and during this time she visits the special place of happiness here. It is a complicated process. New creation of life and progression of a soul takes time and patience. I smiled and wished with all my thoughts that Alexei, baby girl, will be redeeming himself in this new existence. It was good he decided to be female. We have a few inherent characteristics. Childbirth alone makes it necessary to have slightly more nurturing capacities as a female. It did not always work like this, though. Some souls are expressing clearly male characteristics or female. For many transvestite, for many lives, which can lead to difficult physical lives in the body of the opposite sex, if this is not what you are feeling innately. Every transvestite will agree that no straight person can ever understand the compulsion to express a female body, although clearly born a man, or the other way around. We're still so ignorant on Earth. Although most civilizations now investigate the mind, the development in medicine shows our urge to invent medicine for the physical being, forgetting all about the emotion and spiritual body we all possess. Intellectual knowledge is easily acquired, but it must be transformed into emotional or subconscious knowledge. Only when experienced can a transition be permanent. There's so much excess on the earthly plane now. Advances in technology have gone so fast, but wisdom requires time to develop. The foundation of wisdom is balance and harmony. This is neglected today. Everything is done in excess, guided by greed and ambition, steered by fear. We try hard to keep improving our souls, but we have to learn to honor nature again in our physical lives. Otherwise, we will lose this wonderful earth. It will become impossible to continue life in the present physical form. The plants will be awfully lonely. Maybe Earth needs a rest. I expect baby girl to return to revive her soul. Chapter 46. Tony, who is Holly's son. Tony left the house after a really enjoyable evening. He liked Faye. She was exotic in a way, but very down to earth, and he could really clearly understand why Ben was so in love with her. She had a gentleness and generosity of spirit, and he thought that these qualities can be more appealing than so many things which often appear to be the reason why we feel more comfortable with some people than with others. Tony knew he was very keen on feeling the right way about a person. It was probably his mum who was responsible for him being always aware of the intuitive dimensions of a relationship. Holly was an experienced therapist, and she also used her intuition in all ways of her life. She was a very understanding mother, and Tony was used to discussing things of an emotional nature with her. Growing up with a mum like that, it was understandable that Tony was very influenced by the general atmosphere, and tonight was a lovely example of all people concerned creating a feeling of companionship and togetherness. As mushy as this sounds in his own thoughts, that's how he felt. He had arrived at the refuge. Susan had given him a key and he let himself in. The house was quiet and he thought he fancied a quick cup of tea. The kitchen was also the warmest place in the house. Otherwise it was quite chilly. No sign of Isabel. Pity, he thought. But as he had also started yawning, he took his cup of tea and crept up the stairs and let himself into the green room. So called due to the wallpaper. Although the green colour had been changed 3 years ago and the room was now beige, somehow it was always called the green room. Holly thought it sounded classy. He thought it might have something to do with Grandad. Graham Greene was his most favourite writer, and the bookshelf at home was full of first editions, which had been carefully divided between Susan and Holly, and they cherished them like their dad had, although for different reasons. There were a few paperbacks on the shelf, and yes, there were 4 of Graham Greene's well-known books. He was glad it was still the green room. Natalie had occupied this room. He remembered morbid thoughts he was having. Time to go to sleep, with a few more happy thoughts. He was very contented, actually, looking forward to seeing his parents in the morning, and also to spend more time with his cousin and his big love. He smiled, and he was almost instantly asleep. Chapter 47. Holly and Chris meet Faye. Holly and Chris had been a few minutes away from Susan's place. Traffic had been worse than expected. It was freezing cold, and the usual lovely drive seemed long and clogged up this Saturday morning. "Nothing is going to spoil my mood," said Holly, determined when they were waiting to get along the A3. "I totally agree," Chris said. He was really looking forward to seeing his son, Tony. They got on so well. He smiled when he remembered when Tony was a 15-year-old teenager. That was probably his most rebellious year. It had taken him and Holly by surprise. He had been a fairly easy child, very self-reliant and also sensitive and caring. But when he got into puberty, he had been a real Kevin. He had a Kevin face, remembering how they referred to it, relating to a TV comedy series where Kevin was a totally unreasonable youngster. Actually, Tony was not only unreasonable, but had also been skipping school and hung out with a whole bunch of kids who had been doing this for most of their lives. Tony had a real fascination with that. He wanted to identify with them. Why? And he considered his parents provincial and small-minded. Something he admits now. He had heard his friends referring to their parents a lot at the time, and it sounded good. Anyhow, thankfully it was a phase, and thinking back, one friend he had made at that time, Peter, was still in Tony's life. He had benefited from meeting someone like Tony. He had had a really rotten home life. His mother had thrown the father out when Peter was 12, and not before time, as he had been beating her for years, and when he started on Peter, who had for the first time defended his mother physically, she contacted the police. Peter and his mum spent 6 months in the refuge. It had all been quite dramatic, as Peter's father was such a violent and stupid man. It had been a good thing that Tony knew about such situations, as his aunt had been running a refuge since he could remember. Peter and Tony had remained friends, and Peter had visited them after seeing Tony in Germany a few months ago. "Hey, we're here. What are you dreaming about?" Holly stopped the car in front of Susan's house. She nudged Chris. "Tony's Kevin phase," he said. Holly laughed. "Don't remind me. Teenagers. Can't wait to see our manly son." "Too right," said Chris. He locked the car and saw that the front door was already opening. Susan came out, sweeping her arms in an exaggerated welcome gesture. Come in. We have been waiting for you." They all embraced, and Ben came out with Faye in his arm. "Faye, meet my Aunt Holly and my Uncle Chris. Holly, Chris, this is my lovely Faye." Holly took Faye in her arms and kissed her heartily on each cheek. "It is so lovely to meet you, Faye. I hope you like it so far." "I love it all," Faye said, and she meant it. They all wandered into the house. Tony was waiting in the kitchen. He gave his mum a big kiss and kissed his dad's cheek. "You look great, Tony. You surely didn't grow any more." Holly looked up at her son. He had been taller than her for some time, but somehow it always surprised her when she hadn't seen him for a while. He looked so grown up. Handsome, she thought. But then she was his mum. He was definitely taller than Chris. How long had that been so, she thought. Somehow life seemed to race by, hardly time to catch up with things. "How is Berry?" Chris asked Tony. "I talked to her on the phone last month, and she was telling me how difficult the international trading situation is at the moment. Our news have been full of it for weeks now. Credit crunch is the new buzzword. It's scary. Did you notice that Woolworths had closed down?" Chris had always been interested in politics and current affairs. History was a passion of his. He had got on famously with his father-in-law, Holly's dad. It hurt Chris every time he remembered how much he missed the old man. He was fascinating to talk to, so different to his wife. Bliss had always been so spiritual, and he should pass this on to Holly. A royal pain they were sometimes with their talk of energies and spirit. Both men had had a lot in common. She said that presently there was a really unclear situation everywhere. Currencies are terrible for importers, etc. I tell you later. You should give her a ring. You know she loves talking to you. In fact, she said that she wished she could have come over to meet Faye, but also to catch up with things. She complained that you don't see enough of each other. Anyhow, Ben mentioned that they will probably go over there for a few days. "Yes, we are," Ben said. "I booked the flight this morning. It's quite cheap at the moment. We're going just after Christmas. We want to make the most of this time. And once the baby is born, we have to plan things much more, and who knows when we will manage to come back." "Oh, stop it, Ben," said Susan. "I don't even want to think about it. I forbid everybody to talk about the time after Ben and Faye have gone." Everyone laughed. "Too true. Let's not waste this lovely time by talking it away," Ben said. Chris turned to Faye. "How is the present situation affecting your country, Faye? Do you have news about the credit crunch?" "Yes, of course, although I live in a small place. My parents grow their own vegetables, etc., and no one there has a credit card." She laughed at the thought. "Of course, it affects us as well. China is exporting so much to Europe and USA. If trade slows down, it has a huge effect on us as well. We have already factories reducing output. I don't work in industry, so I don't know firsthand, but we certainly have reports in the news. Not so long ago, everyone was talking about how many new millionaires we have every week in China. At the moment, you hear much more about the reverse. We've had so many poor people, though. There are so many of us." She laughed. Everyone joined in. "Another one on the way," Holly said. "A very mixed little baby will come into the world, a mix of English, German, Indian, and Chinese. I can't wait to see the little one," she said. "I bet he or she will be beautiful." "I'm happy to wait a little bit more," Faye said. "I'm really enjoying discovering all these new things at the moment. I'm glad I have another 4 months. I'm determined to make the most of it." Everyone agreed. They sat down. Susan put some music on, and they tucked into the brunch she had prepared in the kitchen. Holly took Tony aside to hear all about his time in Germany. She had spent time over there when she was young. Chris sat down with Faye. He enjoyed talking to young people. He was so pleased that she turned out to be such a likeable girl. She will fit in nicely, he thought. Ben took Tony by the arm away from his aunt. "You can talk to him as much as you like tomorrow," he said to Holly. They had a lot to catch up on, and they took their coffee into the living room. Tony could not yet quite get his head around the fact that his cousin was going to be a father. "I tell you, I'm as surprised as anyone, but I totally love the idea," Penn said. I know I never expected that when I went to China. I purely went for the experience of working in an Far Eastern country, discovering the way of life, and my passion for journalism made it easy to get this opportunity. No way did I imagine I'd meet the love of my life over there. To be honest, I did not meet any other Chinese girl I wanted to go out with. Girls or women in China are quite different to here, at least in the smaller cities and towns. Hong Kong is different. But then Hong Kong is different to anywhere else in the world. "Isn't everywhere different to anywhere else?" Tony asked. "Yes, of course, but you know exactly what I mean. Remember how we used to discuss attributes of girls we liked? Apart from the obvious, it was usually the more assertive types we liked, not exactly what you would culturally expect from a Chinese girl. I met a lot of very quiet and submissive women in the Far East, but obviously the exception proves the rule. Mind you, Faye's mum is what you would call a wise old bird." They both laughed. "Somehow I often feel we are more connected since the internet has become so widespread. It's really easy to keep in touch with you. When I was away, I could just ring you and we could Skype. Wasn't it great when we talked on Skype a few months ago? And both of us had this camera. It was so nice to see you there at your Auntie Berry's house. Yep, too true. I find at the moment you often get a rubbish picture. But that time it was really good. You were still in Hong Kong then. I remember you had met Faye not long before. Yes, technology is pervading our lives so much more now than in every aspect and everywhere, for the good and for the bad. I wonder if the present financial crisis would have been the same if we did not have the internet and technology. No, I don't think so. Everything happens so fast now. Living in Hong Kong really was an eye-opener. It seems there's no time at all for things to adjust to new situations. Anyway, I don't have the answer to any of these things. Seems to me no one has. Chris walked into the living room with his mug of tea in his hand. He had left Faye to the women in the kitchen. The talk about pregnancy had become a bit too much for him. He kept up with them until it all became too graphic, and decided to join the boys. No one has what? He asked. Any idea about the whole economic situation, how it will pan out? Tony said. Barry was going on about how difficult her business had become. She said there was a total lack of confidence. The word banker sounds more like rhyming slang than it ever has. Tony laughed. His cousin in Germany loved the Cockney rhyming slang, which gave similar sounding words a different meaning, but everybody knew what was meant. It would all be decided by the markets, Chris said. History has always shown that these periods of decline and rise are a fact of any economy. It's just concerning every country in the world this time. Each country has to deal with it in their own way. Although you're right, we are all so much more connected with each other now. Do you remember how Omi Bliss used to say that life was just one thing after another? Yes, but she also always used to say, all will be well, Ben said. I wonder what she would make of it all. She was in business like Barry and travelled all over the world. I think she would say that the world is getting its just deserve, Chris said. Remember how she would go on about how we cannot keep taking from this planet? On her last birthday, that was one of her main topics of conversation. Yes, I remember. Funny, that was some time ago now. She was going on then about how the constant rise in house prices would not go on much longer. She was always saying that there was not enough harmony. The rich were getting richer, but the poor kept on struggling. In fact, I remember Roger, her neighbour, saying that there have always been poor people and there always will be. Bliss did not agree at all. We had such a lively time there on that day. Hard to imagine that that was her last day alive. Tony missed his grandmother. He had loved spending time with her. Her age had given her a different perspective, and he remembered sometimes popping in to her flat on his way home. I was just thinking how she had a different perspective to things. I bet she has a different one altogether now. That's another thing we talked about again, death. What would happen after? And I wonder if she had some inkling that she would die soon. Well, Dad, at 95 you're allowed to think that whenever you like, methinks. Tony laughed. That's true, Chris agreed. She was a great one to pontificate about these things, worse than your mum. She did love talking to her. I did love talking to her, though. She really enjoyed most of her life, I think. She considered a good life a bit like a piece of art, created by the individual. I remember having endless discussion with her about these things. With Susan having the refuge, we had always enough examples at hand to discuss. I often think of our talks. I'm so much more involved with the refuge now since I retired. Chris laughed. Retired. I feel less retired now than when I was working. I find myself agreeing with her more often now. It has been interesting for me to help out there. We have so much unhappiness coming through that door. I tell you, there's nothing like the feeling we have when one of our residents gets their act together. We've had quite a few successes recently. Rosie and Isabel have found a nice place not far away from the refuge, and they have their whole board together, and they live in this place. Susan, as Sophie, has already moved out. Tony and Ben both knew who he was talking about. It was nice to hear about things having gone well. Tony liked Alice, Rosie's oldest daughter, and they had quite a few talks over the kitchen table in the refuge in the past. His friend Peter had lived in the refuge, and Tony was used to staying there whenever he came to London from Dorset. Do you remember Pete, Dad? Funny you should mention Pete. I was thinking about him only this morning. Had not thought of him for years, but I was reminded of him. Chris smiled. No need to go into this whole Kevin period. How is he doing? He and his mum were another success story. Too true. He was visiting in Germany, as you know. We had such a good time together. He's studying architecture. You know, he's a bit of a late starter. He will be almost 30 by the time he's finished. Anyhow, he's in Newcastle University, enjoying it by the sound of it. His mum is about to remarry. A really nice guy. Did you know she runs her own business, sells organic vegetables, etc. on the internet? She certainly turned her life around when they came to stay with your mum, Ben. I'm glad. I want to go over to the refuge later, or tomorrow morning, with Faye. She's heard so much about it and wants to meet everyone. Anyhow, let's decide later. I'm happy just sitting here at the moment. My life has been so different over the last few months. It's just nice being here with all of you. Who would have thought, hey? Another drink? That's it for tonight, chapter 47. Tomorrow, chapter 48, Rosie and Isabel. Have a lovely Thursday night.